Hi, I'm Milas. 3 weeks ago, I got a letter from my parents that said, "Don't come to the family gathering, we're cutting ties." No explanation, no warning. Just a clean break, like I was never part of them to begin with. But it wasn't the letter that broke me. It was realizing they'd been writing me out for years, erasing my name from contracts, claiming credit for my work, shifting property behind my back. They said it was simplification. But what do you call it when your own family uses your name, your signature, your silence, and then tells you were never really involved? Is that family or just strategy? The envelope was thick, the kind of paper that feels like it should carry something meaningful, wedding invitations perhaps, or a letter from someone who still remembers how to write. But it wasn't either of those. It was hand-addressed in my father's exacting cursive. No return address, no stamp. Just the family crest printed faintly on the flap, like that alone gave it weight. I opened it in the kitchen, still wearing my heels from work. My coat hung from one arm, grocery bag in the other. The words were short, brutal in their plainness. "Don't come to the family gathering. We're cutting ties. It's for the best. Mom and Dad." That was it. No salutation, no explanation, not even the pretense of warmth. I didn't cry. I didn't drop the letter or clutch my chest. I set the bag on the counter, took off my heels, and poured a glass of wine. The tick of the wall clock was louder than usual, or maybe I was just more still than usual. I read it again, then folded it back along the original crease and slid it inside the envelope like it was some bill I'd deal with later. But I knew I wouldn't. There was no later to return this to. I whispered to no one, "So this is how it ends." But the truth was, I'd seen the signs long before they bothered to write them down. No one mourns a fire if you saw the smoke years ago. And in our family, the smoke had been thick for a while. Not from screaming matches or slammed doors. That would have been too direct. No, our fire smothered in silence, in cold smiles and missed calls. In my name, left-off invitations and agendas and plaques. 3 months ago, I stood in the boardroom of Ren Automotive for what was supposed to be a routine meeting. 5 chairs were arranged around the table. 6 of us were present. I stood near the door, assuming someone had simply forgotten to roll in an extra. No one did. My brother Mason looked up from his phone and said, "Oh, thought you weren't coming today." Isolde, perfectly poised in her navy suit, didn't look up. She just said, "We didn't want to crowd the table." I stood for 2 hours as they discussed inventory projections, vendor shifts, and marketing expansions, all areas I used to lead. I wasn't asked for input. I wasn't even given a printout. I left with sore feet and a sore throat, not from speaking, but from not speaking. I told myself that day it was a mistake, that maybe I missed an email, that maybe they didn't mean it the way it felt. But tonight, the envelope made it clear. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me, and they'd been doing it piece by piece. I thought about the quarterly report I wrote that was later presented by Mason, the legal draft I proofed that Isolde claimed to have negotiated, the gala I organized and wasn't invited to attend, the decisions made over family dinner that no one bothered to mention to me. No, this letter wasn't the end. It was just the first time they'd said it out loud. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dim kitchen, casting the letter's shadow across the keys. I clicked open the file I'd created 6 months earlier. Contingency Family Exit Strategy. Some part of me must have known. I typed 2 words into a new email addressed to my parents. Understood. Then I clicked send. It wasn't rage. It wasn't defeat. It was the kind of quiet that comes when a door closes behind you, and you don't flinch, because you already walked through it. I didn't plan on disappearing. I planned on leaving a shadow they couldn't clean. The next time I saw them, my family that is, they were smiling. Perfect teeth, coordinated outfits, music rising beneath their voices. It was all happening on a screen the size of a garage door. They called it the Legacy Gala. 25 years of Ren Automotive, silver tablecloths, crystal glasses, a slideshow that moved like a movie trailer, built by grit, held by family. I sat in the back corner of the ballroom, barely lit by the flicker of the screen. Not out of shame. I just wasn't on the seating chart. My name had been printed on a name tag, sure, but it read like a placeholder, like a courtesy. The video played on. There was Dad standing beside the first garage in 1998. Then Isolde shaking hands with the governor at a ribbon cutting. Mason holding up a framed award I helped write the nomination for. Even cousins I barely remembered got a cameo, laughing in workshops, posing in front of trucks. But me? I wasn't there, not once, not even in the group photos, not in the slideshow, not in the credits, not even in the bloopers reel someone thought would be cute. Just gone. A woman at my table leaned over, trying to whisper discreetly, though I could feel the awkwardness in her breath. Weren't you part of the expansion in Raleigh? She asked, blinking with honest confusion. I could have sworn I saw your name on that press release. I gave her the kind of smile you offer when the truth is too big to say. I was. Then I was rewritten. The sentence surprised even me. But it was true, rewritten, like I had been penciled in lightly, and someone finally remembered to erase. The host raised his glass. Applause broke out. Then the lights dimmed again, and a pre-recorded interview with Isolde began rolling on the screen. She looked polished, practiced. Her voice softened just enough to sound warm, just enough to sound rehearsed. Our success, she said, comes from family. Every one of us plays a role. Of course, some were more involved than others. Melis, for example, was always a wonderful personal supporter, but she wasn't really involved in the decision-making. I didn't blink. I didn't look around. I sat as still as I had in that boardroom months ago, when no one brought an extra chair. Supporter, not co-founder, not operations lead, not financial architect behind our regional growth, just supporter, like a fan in the bleachers. The applause came again, polite, safe. I wondered if anyone in that room had heard what I just did, or if they'd swallowed it like champagne. I thought about the nights I stayed at the office to cross-check invoices, the hours I spent rewriting Mason's numbers so investors wouldn't pull out, the way I fixed the supplier contract that would have ruined our margins. All of it, scrubbed clean. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I skipped coffee. I didn't check emails. I opened my laptop, created a new folder, and named it exactly what it was. Timeline of contribution, uncredited. Inside, I started placing files, lease documents, budget drafts, photos, my emails, edited and resent under someone else's name. I organized each by date, time-stamped each piece. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about rage. This was record-keeping. Quiet, careful, legal. I wasn't shouting my name back into their narrative. I was building a mirror, one that would eventually reflect who they'd become when no one was looking. That evening, a friend texted me a link. Thought you'd want to see this. It was a news clip, regional business coverage. A reporter stood in front of our flagship shop in Charlotte, glowing under branded signage. In a rare moment of transparency, she said, CEO Isolde Wren credited her family for holding the company together. When asked about Melis Wren, she simply said, she wasn't involved. Wasn't involved. The way people say she wasn't invited, or she wasn't needed. I stared at the video for a long time. Then I closed my laptop. If I didn't exist in their legacy, then I had nothing left to protect. It had started raining again. Not the kind that sweeps you into shelter, but a slow, nagging drizzle that seemed to have no beginning and no plans of ending. I stayed inside that weekend, didn't pick up my phone, didn't respond to the handful of colleagues who still sent polite checking-in messages. By Sunday morning, I found myself scrolling through my archives, the kind of files most people delete after a deal closes or a contract is signed. I didn't. I never did. I kept everything. I opened the folder labeled Expansion Loan, East Region. Inside were PDFs, scanned signatures, email chains, interest rate breakdowns. and right there, in black and white, was my name. Not just as a secondary contact, I was listed as the primary guarantor. 2 years ago, I'd been called into the bank last minute. Isolde had said something casual like, "We just need your signature to move things along. It's mostly for optics." It was pouring that day, too. I'd left my umbrella in the car and rushed in with damp shoes, my hair clinging to my neck. The papers had been printed in advance. No one offered to explain them. No one sat beside me. No lawyer. No family member. Just me, a pen, and a banker who didn't ask questions because none were supposed to be asked. I signed. And now, I was the reason the interest rate was lower. I was the one whose credit kept the structure standing. Their legacy had been built on my financial spine, and I hadn't even been told. They didn't just erase me, I said aloud to no one. They insured themselves with me. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something twist in my chest. Not anger, not yet, just corrosion. I closed the loan file and opened another. Family events, reimbursements. One stood out, my nephew's birthday party last spring. I remembered that day vividly. Mason had shown up late. Isolde was glued to her phone, and my mother had spent most of the party talking to another family about how hard it was to manage everything alone now that the kids were older. But the gift, an electric toy car with flashing headlights and a custom nameplate, was a hit. A big red bow, the kind you see in commercials. A card taped to the front. Love, Grandma, and Grandpa. Everyone clapped. The boy squealed. Mason gave me a thumbs up across the yard as if to say, "Nice touch." That night, I got a notification on my phone. My corporate credit card had been charged $428.75 at Toybox Plus. The receipt had my name, my account, and a note I'd added, "For Jacob's birthday, gift from me." No one paid me back. No one even acknowledged it. And I didn't ask. I just saved the receipt. Resentment doesn't always come crashing through the front door. Sometimes it grows like mold, quiet, stubborn, spreading in places no one checks until something smells wrong. I opened a new folder that morning. Assets used without consent. Into it, I dropped the scanned loan, the gift receipt, the text message from Mason asking, "You mind picking something nice up for Jacob? I'll Venmo you later." He never did. I attached the email from the event planner that I had paid, under my name, for the catered cupcakes that were later credited to Isolde's personal brand. I didn't add commentary. I didn't write a letter. I just organized the data. Not because I wanted to fight yet, but because I was done playing dumb. Later that evening, I passed by my reflection in the kitchen window. I looked tired, but not fragile. Weathered, but intact. Like something old and solid you find buried in the ground. Something you once thought useless, but turns out was part of the foundation. I'd given my family the best years of my work, my credit, my energy, and in return, they handed me silence. Then they built success on the quiet I never disrupted. If love was measured by silence, I had given them everything. It was time they heard the cost. The rain had stopped, but everything still felt wet. The kind of damp that lingers, clinging to corners and settling in bone. I'd meant to spend the afternoon cleaning out old boxes at my parents' house, the ones they left behind when they moved into that condo across town. The place was being remodeled. Dust hung in the air like a quiet warning, and most of the furniture had been covered in thin white sheets, like ghosts politely waiting to be dismissed. I told myself it was just clutter, that I was doing them a favor. The attic was hotter than the rest of the house, even in February. I pulled open the hatch and climbed up, a flashlight wedged between my teeth. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but I found it anyway. A chest tucked behind an old mirror and a pile of moth-eaten winter coats, the kind with a latch that sticks and makes you use your whole shoulder just to hear it creak open. Inside, neatly folded linens, yellowed newspaper, a bundle of scarves I vaguely remembered seeing around my grandmother's neck. Beneath them, an envelope. Not just any envelope, thick, ivory-toned, sealed. On the front, in slanted script that sent a jolt straight through me. For Maëlys, give this to her after I'm gone. Love, Grandma. The seal wasn't broken. The postmark read 5 years ago. 5 years. I sat down right there on the attic floor, legs crossed like I was back in grade school waiting for roll call. My fingers trembled, not from surprise, but recognition. I knew what this was. I just didn't know why it was still here. I opened it carefully, afraid the paper might fall apart. It didn't. It was stronger than it looked. Like the woman who'd written it. Maëlys, I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if it'll be kept from you. But just in case, I want you to have something in writing. You were always the one who listened. The one who asked how others were before they spoke of yourself. The one who saw when people were hurting and didn't run away. You remind me of my own mother in that way. There is a keepsake box in the cedar chest downstairs. It holds photographs, a bracelet that was mine, and a key to the safety deposit box. Inside that box is the portion of the trust I intended for you. Not because you're the youngest, or because I favor you, but because I trust you. Because you've never asked for much, and you've given so much more. Don't let them shrink you. I see you, even when others won't. Love always, Grandma. I didn't cry right away. I read it 3 times, like maybe I'd missed something, like maybe the ink would smudge and reveal a secret code. But no, just words. Love. Trust. The kind of recognition I hadn't realized I'd been starving for until it landed in my lap too late. Then the tears came, soft, steady. I cried not because I missed her, I'd been doing that for years, but because someone had tried to erase what she left for me, and they almost succeeded. Later that week, I requested a copy of her will from the estate attorney. He met me at his office, a tidy man with anxious fingers who drummed lightly on his desk when he spoke. I don't recall that letter being part of the packet submitted after her passing, he said. I held it up. Then why was it dated and sealed 5 years ago, with instructions written on the front? He swallowed. There were some items deemed personal, not legally binding. Deemed by who? He paused. Your sister was the point of contact. She made the judgment call on what was essential. Isolde. Of course. She decided what counted. She decided I didn't. That night, I opened an email from an old intern who had once worked under me when I managed vendor audits. She'd moved to Oregon, started her own consulting firm, and we hadn't spoken in over a year. Subject line, saw this, thought you'd want it. Attached, a forwarded thread from a company board meeting email 2 years ago. The timestamp was during the funding round I'd helped finalize. Buried near the bottom, from Isolde herself. Don't CC Maëlys. She always gets too emotional and slows things down. Too emotional. Like the numbers I caught that saved the company thousands were just mood swings. Like asking for accountability was a tantrum. I didn't cry this time. I didn't even blink. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. No explanation, no context. Just the subject. Evidence of strategic exclusion, sustained. Then I closed my laptop and poured myself a drink. They didn't forget me. They removed me. There's a difference. The drink was still cold in my hand when I realized I hadn't taken a sip. I set it down on the counter and stared at the condensation ring it left behind. Something about that perfect silent circle felt too familiar. Present, but fading, slowly disappearing into the surface it sat on. The next morning, I met Jenna for coffee. It had been nearly a year since we'd last seen each other in person, but she looked the same, comfortable in her skin, her words always measured, but never hesitant. We chose a quiet table in the corner of a cafe we used to frequent when we were still convinced ambition alone would take us wherever we wanted to go. We made small talk, work, weather, a mutual acquaintance who'd left her husband to start a pottery studio in Asheville. But then the conversation shifted. Jenna leaned forward slightly, her voice low but steady. Can I ask you something without you biting my head off? I nodded. If you stop doing all the work, stopped organizing, paying for things, cleaning up messes, do you think they'd still keep you around? Or are you just useful? The words landed like a stone in water. No splash. Just wait. I didn't answer. I think she saw the answer before I could form it anyway. She didn't push, just stirred her coffee, then changed the subject. Something benign, real estate or travel plans. I nodded along, but my thoughts didn't follow. On the drive home, her question kept playing over in my mind like a broken loop. Would they still want me if I stopped giving? I thought back to birthdays where I brought the cake because no one else remembered. Meetings where I rewrote decks after hours so Mason wouldn't look foolish. Calls I took from vendors because no one else wanted to deal with logistics. Not once had anyone asked. It was assumed, like air, like background noise. They only noticed when it was missing. Maybe Jenna hadn't meant to hurt me. Maybe she was the only one who'd been brave enough to say it aloud. Later that weekend, I attended Jacob's birthday party. Small backyard thing. Balloons tangled in the bushes, kids running wild. Mason grilled while Isolde mingled in a sundress she'd already posted about on Instagram. Casual family moments, the caption said. Jacob tore through wrapping paper like a hurricane, squealing when he reached the new tablet. He held it up and shouted, "Thank you, Aunt Malis. You always get me the best stuff." Silence blanketed the yard like a thick fog. Then a polite cough from my mother. Isolde smiled tightly. "Actually, sweetheart, that one's from Grandma and Grandpa." The boy tilted his head. "But Mom said not to tell." "Oh." His voice trailed off. Then came the forced chuckles, the quick change of subject. Someone asked about the playlist. Someone else offered to cut the cake. I knelt beside Jacob, gently brushing a leaf from his shoulder. "You're very welcome, buddy," I said. "I hope you enjoy it." He hugged me and ran off. Inside, I smiled. On the surface, it looked like I didn't mind. But something inside had finally realigned. Not a break, not a crack. Just a small, quiet click. A lock disengaging. That night, I opened my laptop again and created a new folder. Pattern of erasure, extended instances. I added screenshots, receipts, voice memos, even casual text messages that hinted at the rewrites, the reassigned credit, the vanished acknowledgments. I didn't intend to file a lawsuit, not yet, but I knew enough now to prepare. Then I opened a draft email to the bank. Not to accuse, just to inquire. Subject: Request for co-signer release inquiry body. I am seeking clarification regarding current financial liabilities attached to my name in relation to Ren Automotive. Please confirm status and any conditions for disassociation. I read it 3 times, then saved it to drafts. Lying in bed later, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me, like time circling the same truth over and over again. If I stopped being useful, I whispered, would they even notice I was gone? I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done pretending. By Monday morning, I was in a blazer, standing in the lobby of the bank where I'd once signed my name without asking enough questions. I hadn't slept much the night before, but I didn't feel tired, just sharp. Tired is what you feel when you're fighting to keep going. Sharp is what you become when you stop asking for permission. The receptionist smiled politely and led me to a small conference room. Mr. Fulton came in a few minutes later, carrying a manila folder and the kind of forced cheer that only someone in risk management can perfect. We shook hands. His grip was firm, but his eyes were already scanning the documents on the table, like he knew what I was about to ask. I just have a few questions, I began, sitting across from him. Of course, he said, opening the folder. I saw your email. You're asking about your name being tied to the operating loan for Ren Automotive? I nodded. Yes. Am I still on it? He glanced down, scrolled through his tablet, then stopped. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly, in a way that made my stomach twist, even though I already knew. Yes, he said. You're still listed as a primary guarantor? I kept my expression still. And the family never notified you that I stepped back from the company? He removed his glasses and rested them on the table. We were under the impression you were still involved. Your signature gave the loan stability. Credit profile, long-term assets. You're basically the reason they got approved at the rate they did. I was never told, I said, my voice low. You never asked, he replied gently, like it was meant to sound fair. But it's all here. He pushed the document across the table. It was all there, dates, terms, my name inked in bold, clean strokes. I stared at it for a moment, then nodded. I'll need copies of everything related to this loan sent to me and my legal counsel, I said, already rising from my seat. I'm initiating removal procedures, effective immediately. He didn't argue, just handed me a pen and pointed where to initial. By the time I got home, the rain had started again, a steady tapping against the windows. I walked straight to my office, opened my laptop, and clicked into the folder I'd named 6 months ago. Exit strategy. Everything was there. Contract scans, redlined terms, my email trail showing they'd removed me from internal communications months before. Even the voicemail from their accountant, asking me to please not mention anything to the bank until after quarter close. I drafted the formal request. Subject: revocation of financial association, immediate body. Attached is a notarized request to remove my name as guarantor on all outstanding loans related to Ren Automotive. Please confirm the next steps for legal disassociation. All related documents are enclosed. I hesitated only a second before hitting send. That weekend, the company hosted its winter celebration. Normally, I would have been part of the planning team, managing vendors, confirming RSVPs. This time, I received an itinerary from Leora that simply read, check-in coordinator, dress code, professional. Please arrive 30 minutes before doors open. I wasn't listed as a host, not mentioned in the welcome program, no seat at the family table. While Isolde delivered her usual polished speech about legacy and leadership, I stood at the front with a barcode scanner, greeting guests like a volunteer intern. No one even looked twice, until one of our longtime vendors approached me with a soft laugh and a squint of recognition. Maëlys? I almost didn't recognize you. Weren't you one of the owners? I smiled. I used to be. He blinked, but I'd already turned back to the check-in sheet. After the event, I walked out to my car, heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation. I sat in the driver's seat, opened my phone, and typed a second email. Subject: supporting documentation, operational exclusion body. Please find attached a series of internal memos, emails, and meeting minutes demonstrating my exclusion from business decisions at Ren Automotive over the past 18 months. I'm not a participating officer and cannot be held financially liable for decisions made without my knowledge or consent. I hit send. Then I sat back, staring through the windshield at the empty street ahead. They used my name like a firewall, so I took the name back. The morning after I sent the documentation to the bank, my phone vibrated off the kitchen counter before the sun had fully risen. At first, I thought it was an alarm, but when I picked it up, the notifications scrolled endlessly. Calls, texts, voicemails. Isolde, Mason, the company accountant. Even Leora, who hadn't said a word to me in months. 42 missed calls, 17 unread messages. One from my mother. Please call back, now. I didn't. Instead, I wrapped my hands around a warm mug and sat at the window, watching the neighborhood come to life in slow motion. Joggers with earbuds. A woman walking her dog. A delivery truck rumbling past. All of them moving, existing, unaware that a house of cards was collapsing just a few miles away. The voicemail came just after 9 a.m. The accountant's voice cracked with panic. Maëlys, the bank froze the credit line. They said your name removal triggered a risk flag. They're reassessing everything. If they pull support, we're done. Please, we need to talk. Just help us stop this from getting worse. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, without listening to the rest. I labeled the audio file attempted guilt leverage and dragged it into the folder where I'd been archiving everything. Then I turned off my phone for the rest of the day. That night, I met with my attorney. We reviewed the final steps to complete my detachment from all financial obligations tied to the company. While cross-checking documents, she paused and frowned. "This doesn't make sense," she said, scrolling through a scanned deed. "What doesn't?" "This transfer. It's dated the same day you received the severance letter. A commercial property in your name with your father. Transferred entirely to Isolde." I leaned forward. "What?" She turned the screen. It was labeled as Family Trust Reassignment for Simplification. I read the document 3 times. The ink was clean. No smudges. No hesitation in the signatures. Simplification. That's what they called it. I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. Simplification means erasure. They didn't just want me gone from meetings or emails. They wanted my name off every piece of legacy they couldn't steal quietly. Back at home, I pulled open the filing cabinet and removed the original deed, the one I'd signed with Dad years ago, back when we still talked about values and vision, when he still looked at me like a partner, not a placeholder. It was signed in my grandmother's presence. I remembered that day. She'd insisted on being there, said something about how history needed witnesses. Now, that paper was nothing more than a copy of a reality they'd already rewritten. I took it to the sink, lit a match, watched the edges curl and blacken until the truth disappeared into ash. Not because I regretted it, but because I had better documentation now. Legal ones, electronic, certified, fireproof. The next call came just after 10. It was my mother. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was soft. Not sad, just worn. "I didn't know," she said. "About the deed?" "Yes, and the letter." I waited. "I didn't want this," she added. "We didn't mean for it to get here." I closed my eyes. "But it did, and none of you stopped it." She didn't reply. The line stayed open for a beat longer, then went dead. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the wall where the family photo used to hang. I'd taken it down months ago, still hadn't replaced it with anything. Just a blank space that looked too clean for what it represented. I wasn't hurt anymore. I wasn't even disappointed. I was done. The next morning, I booked an appointment with the state auditor's office. No dramatic email. No family group chat message. Just a time-stamped calendar event labeled Formal Complaint, Property Reassignment Investigation. They'd used the paper to erase me. Now I'd use the law to erase their illusion of control. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. By the time I arrived at the state auditor's office, the sun was already beginning to climb above the high-rises of downtown Charlotte. The glass doors reflected just enough of my face to remind me I looked tired, but not undone. I'd worn the gray blazer I used for depositions, not grief. I didn't bring emotion into buildings like this. I brought facts. The receptionist pointed me toward conference room B. 2 investigators sat waiting. One was middle-aged, crisp in speech and posture. The other looked younger, with sharp eyes and a coffee mug that said, "Audit like nobody's watching." I sat down across from them, placed my brief folder on the table, and offered a single sentence. "Let the record show, I never authorized that transfer, and I have the proof." They didn't blink. They just nodded. I began sliding forward documents in order, scanned deed transfers, emails with mismatched timestamps, the formal withdrawal letter I'd sent to the bank 2 days before the reassignment of assets. I believe this transfer was executed without my knowledge, and in direct contradiction to what I'd already communicated. The younger one raised an eyebrow. "You're saying the asset was moved after your formal detachment?" I nodded. 11:42 a.m., the exact time the property deed was logged. I received the severance notice at 12:05 that same day. The room went quiet, except for the low hum of a wall vent. "Do you find the timing coincidental?" the older one asked. I gave him a look I'd perfected in my years managing investor relations. "I find it strategic." They exchanged glances, took notes, asked for digital copies, which I emailed on the spot. Half an hour later, Isolde walked in. Perfect hair, tailored suit. Her attorney 2 steps behind her. She offered a tight smile when she saw me. Melis, I wasn't expecting you to be here in person. I didn't expect a lot of things, I said. The auditors asked her a series of questions. She answered each one with well-rehearsed phrases. This was an internal restructuring. We followed family trust protocol. The signatures were reviewed by our in-house counsel. They nodded, until one of them finally set the time-stamped deed at the center of the table. This, he said, tapping the paper, was processed just minutes before Ms. Wren's severance, and you're still saying there's no conflict in that? Isolde glanced at me for a moment, as if assessing which version of me was sitting here. Past Melis, quiet Melis, or this one? We didn't think she'd object, she said coolly. We assumed she'd want to simplify things. She's always said she wasn't attached to titles. I didn't speak. I simply slid forward the last document I had. It wasn't a bank statement or a contract. It was a letter. Handwritten, yellowing around the edges. I explained its origin. My grandmother wrote this a month before her passing. It was given to Clara Jensen, her friend, to hold for me, in case my copy never made it. I handed it to the lead auditor. He read it silently, then aloud. This land was meant for you. No matter what legal dance they do, fight smart, love Grandma. The room didn't fall silent. It collapsed into it. Even Isolde's attorney stopped scribbling. The lead auditor leaned back. We'll be conducting a full review, effective immediately. Isolde didn't explode. She didn't raise her voice or knock over a chair. She simply clenched her jaw. Her voice came out low and tight. You think this makes you the favorite now? I smiled, not with triumph, but something quieter. Real. No, I think it just makes me not invisible. After the meeting, I stepped outside. The air smelled like coming rain. I didn't check my phone until I was halfway down the block. One message, from Leora. If you want to talk, I'm here. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. They tried to write me out. I rewrote the ending. 3 weeks passed before anything official arrived. The envelope was from the bank. Not heavy, not urgent. Just formal. Clean edges, white paper, black type. This letter confirms that all commercial loans associated with your name have been successfully restructured. You are no longer a liable party. No further obligations remain. No apology. No thank you. Just ink and legality. I sat at my kitchen table, sunlight warming the wood beneath my hands. I read the letter once, then again, and then I folded it neatly and placed it into a plain manila folder marked Closed. Outside, the cherry blossoms were starting to open. I hadn't spoken to anyone in the family since the audit. Not a word from Isolde. Mason had gone quiet too. My mother had sent one text, just a link to an article about heart health, like we were still pretending the world hadn't shifted underneath us. But the headlines did what they never would. Wren Automotive CEO steps down amid governance concerns. Family-owned chain faces scrutiny over internal oversight. No one named me. No fingers pointed directly. But the air around them had changed. Vendors began pulling out. A temporary board was assembled. The same accountants who once pretended I wasn't in the room now led calls with urgency. The story was already moving on. And I let it. I deleted the Google alert for Wren Automotive from my phone. Later that week, I listened to the voicemail from Leora again. I stayed quiet because I was scared, she'd said. But you were right to speak. If you ever want coffee, I owe you more than one. I didn't respond, but I didn't erase it either. Some silences don't need to be broken. They just need to exist long enough to make space for something else. That something else came on a Wednesday afternoon. A small office tucked behind a co-working space downtown, still smelling faintly of paint and possibility. I'd rented it without much fanfare. One desk, one window. A nameplate on the wall I screwed in myself. Anchor and Flame. Underneath, the words etched in gold. Sometimes you steady the ship, sometimes you burn it down. I opened the door to the first client, a woman in her 40s, newly divorced, cut out of her husband's landscaping company after helping him build it from the ground up. She didn't need therapy, she needed options, documents, leverage. I slid a clipboard across the desk. "Let's start with what's yours," I said. Helping her didn't heal me, but it reminded me that I'd already done the work. I wasn't looking for vindication anymore. I wasn't even chasing peace. What I wanted was freedom, not from my family, but from the part of me that thought I still needed their permission to take up space. They'd spent years telling me I was hard to deal with. Emotional. Over-involved. The truth was, I was just inconvenient. And inconvenient women build their own rooms when they're shut out of others. As I walked to the front door that evening, I paused to lock the glass and check the mailbox. Inside was a small envelope, handwritten with no return address. The handwriting was neat, familiar. It was from Clara Jensen. A photograph slipped out, a black and white image of my grandmother in her 20s, standing beside a pickup truck and a wooden sign that read, "Wren's Repair." She looked strong, windblown, unapologetic. The note beneath it read, "She built more than engines, so will you." I held the photo against my chest for a moment. They said I'd regret leaving, but I didn't leave to prove a point. I left because silence isn't love, and absence doesn't always mean loss. Sometimes it means peace. If you've ever been written out of a story you helped build, write your own, loud or in quiet, but write it.